Hi, I'm Stan Goldstein with Kates Boylston Publications. Today I'm happy to be joined by Tony Russo, a new employee who has joined us here at KB. Tony is an editor with us here at Kates Boylston and will be mostly writing and putting together our weekly Funeral Service Insider newsletter. Tony, welcome.
Hi.
Glad to have you with us here at KB.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here today. Happy to be here at KB.
Hey, tell me a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up and went to college, things like that?
Sure. I'm originally from New Jersey. I was born in Jersey City. I grew up in a small town called Union Beach, which is on the Bay Shore, is the easiest way to put it. I know there's a scandal if you say you're from Central Jersey, so I just say the Bay Shore and let people be confused that way instead. I actually didn't go to college out of high school. I went right to work, and I was in the hotel business for 15 or so years before I went to college, or less, I guess 12, because I was 30 when I went to college. My life in the hotel business kind of bounced me around, and I ended up in Maryland, on Maryland's Eastern Shore, in working in a town called Salisbury, and it's not far from Ocean City, maybe half an hour from the ocean. Which, having grown up in Union Beach, this is the farthest I've ever lived from the ocean in my life, and I live on a peninsula that's 100 miles wide.
Wow.
And so, when I went to college, my working plan was I was interested in becoming a professor, and so I studied philosophy and history, and as it turned out, I ended up getting divorced. And I had to find a way to make a living with a philosophy and a history degree. and so what I was good at doing, what I am good at doing, is taking complex things and making them simple. And I'm impossible to bore. And so journalism just, fit right in. I can write. I've always been pretty good at writing, so that was never an issue. And that is how I got into journalism. And then I spent, almost 20 years there. Have spent almost 20 years there so far.
Where did you go to college?
Oh, I'm sorry. I went here at Salisbury University in Salisbury, Maryland, and it was a really, really pleasant experience. I got 2 degrees there instead of like a double major. I stayed for 5 years so I could get a full degree in both history and in philosophy. And one of the things that I always remembered in journalism, having taken the history degree. So when you take a history degree, one of the things you have to do is go into the archives and read like old letters, and you'd have to build a biography of someone based on all the stuff they found in their house after they died in the 1600s or whatever. And one of the very frustrating things for me was how few stories there were about regular people. It was really all these are the rich guys, and this is what their life was like. And as I got into journalism, I realized that I had this opportunity to tell stories about regular people and regular lives and what it was like to live here now. And so that was kind of an alternate approach to journalism I take. I mean, they always say, journalism is the first draft of history, but I took that very, very, very seriously. And I said, okay, well, when someone wants to write about the Eastern Shore in 100 years, if they dig up one of my stories, I want them to say, oh, look, here's something that we didn't tend to know about this period in time because someone took the time to write it down. And so I've always been fascinated by, not quite offbeat. I mean, offbeat is the way that we would put it, but just normal stories and finding out why, people who are maybe not as extraordinary on the surface are really having extraordinary lives themselves. And if you make the effort, that's easy enough to do. But you have to make the effort. The effort is the hard part. The writing's always the easy part.
And did you work for a newspaper then eventually, or who did you write for?
If it has been in print on the Eastern Shore in the last 20 years, I have written for them. It's a really rural area. And so I started with a weekly. I worked at a weekly for a couple of years, and I edited that. And that was Beach News. I worked down right outside of Ocean City in a small town called Berlin, which while I was there, it went from one of those beaten down towns, but that's all, junk shops and stuff. And now it's one of the toniest towns in the region. There are multiple restaurants you can't get a reservation at instead of one dive bar. So I got to be part of that discovery of this small town. And during that time, this is one of the fun facts that I forget about myself, but people always seem to be very interested. During that time, I got involved in writing about a local brewery that was opening, and this is in 2008, 2006 maybe. And it was early in the craft beer revolution, so I was kind of into that. And as a result, I got to document all of that. I actually wrote 2 books on the history of beer in the region, one the history of Delaware beer called Delaware Beer, and one on Maryland beer called Eastern Shore Beer. And those were I've written 3 books. Those were my first 2, and it was a fun experience to write, and that really got me to that place where I'd always wanted to be, which is like, this is what it was like to live here during the craft beer revolution. And I was able to tie stuff back to colonial times. And so I think I was able to make a nice bridge in both of those books for people who want to know what it was like before, during, and after the craft beer revolution in the region. So that was fun. And then I was at the Star Democrat, which is a daily in Easton, Maryland. What was fun about that was when like senators and stuff go on vacation, they go to Easton. They go to the surrounding area in Easton. It was right on the Chesapeake Bay. And so I was the business reporter there, and I had to do like one House Beautiful type story each month. And I stopped at the wrong mansion on my way to a story. What I thought was the mansion was the guest house. And they're like, no, keep going. And it was just like, I was at the kind of splendid houses that no one would ever invite me to of their own volition. So that was kind of neat.
Nice. And since you mentioned it, what's the 3rd book you wrote? And are those books still available on Amazon or anywhere? Can you find them?
They are still available. The 3rd book that I wrote, it was about cults. It came out just about a year ago, and it was the result. I went into podcasting for a while, so I had been working on this podcast about this QAnon cult. The name of the book is Dragged into the Light: Truthers, Reptilians, Super Soldiers, and Death Inside an Online Cult. It was kicked off by a murder that occurred in Tobyhanna, Pennsylvania, that's in the Poconos. A woman was charged with the murder of her boyfriend. What I always say is, she didn't want to kill him and he didn't want to die, but here we are. So it was, these people were involved in a cult where the cult leader wasn't really known to anyone. Her name was Sherry Shriner. I've been on 2 television stories about her. It's a really compelling story, but it's just so weird. They believed, again, and I'm writing about this. When I started writing about this cult, it was 2019, I think. So QAnon hadn't really exploded in the way that it had. And so the things that I'm about to say now were really foreign at the time, which is they believed that, the president was a reptile, and that, people got possessed by demons and went around doing awful things and things like that. And what was fascinating about Sherry Shriner, who was the cult leader, was that there was nothing fascinating about her. It wasn't like she was good looking. It wasn't like she was interesting. It wasn't like she was saying anything novel, but she was just giving these people kind of like a hate fix pre-Twitter, I think, is how she got so popular. And she was, when she died, spoilers, her GoFundMe account alone had $150,000 in it. Wow. Yeah, she was getting cash in the mail. She had a Patreon, but when she died, everything got taken down, so it was harder to get a sense of. But she was doing very, very well, and so I'd written a podcast about her, and then I got permission to write the book and I wrote the book about her. And yeah, it was a great experience. I like taking the time to do these deep dives, and this isn't a good time to be a nonfiction writer if you're writing nonfiction that's not about like business or self-help or things like that. So there's no money in it, I think, is the point, but it's just really satisfying to take 2 or 3 years to put together these stories and then to share them, because it really is a snapshot. One of the things that I always say about the book is that I didn't use the word QAnon in the book because I thought it would be too bizarre and people wouldn't understand it. And of course, as the book came out, QAnon is on the front page of Time magazine. So, so I actually went back and I re-engineered the introduction to at least put the word in, because I described everything that QAnon was, but I didn't use the word because like I said, I thought it would just confuse readers, and I didn't know that the news was going to get to a point where it was clear that everyone knew who QAnon was.
Right. And then tell us how you gotten to be writing about funeral service now. What did you know about funeral service prior to it? And you've been with us for about a month now, so
Yeah.
give me your impressions of so far.
No, I really enjoy it so far. I was compelled by the opportunity. Everything I know about the funeral service I learned from being an altar boy, which is, if you're sufficiently somber, you can get an extra $2 or $3 out of the funeral director at the end of the service. But that was pretty much it as far as what I knew about funeral service. What I've learned in the last month is only makes me more interested in getting deeper into it. I like to figure out stuff and tell people the stuff I figured out. So that's one of the things that makes this job so compelling for me, is I'll be able to find out things that I'm good at making connections. That's one of the things that the philosophy really helped. I've been fortunate that I can see a third way a lot of the times. And so the questions that I've been able to ask have gotten people to give me answers that they're not used to giving. And I think that brings it out. I think I can bring it out in the stories. I'm hoping to. The other thing that really compels me about FSI, Funeral Service Insider, is that it's subscription only, and that is kind of a flip on its head from what I'm used to doing. So pure journalism, I was never the spoonful of sugar. I was always the medicine. I was always the medicine, in the newspaper. I wrote about sewer, and I did nice profiles on people, but I wrote about government, and I didn't really get too much into crime. I have an interesting relationship with crime reporting. I wasn't a name and blame kind of guy. That wasn't what I liked about reporting. But the thing was that I didn't feel like my job was to put in what I thought the general reader needed to know. The challenge with FSI is justifying the reader's time in a way that it's not as important on the internet or in a free weekly newspaper, right? You're just justifying the space in a free weekly newspaper. But I want to write stories where people read that and they're like, I'm glad I subscribed to this, because I'm glad, I'm certainly, the readers are all way more experienced than I am in the business. But what I think I can bring to it is an opportunity to think of things that they may not have considered, or to put things in a way that they maybe haven't heard them before, that helps to broaden their view, and really, I haven't done a lot of service journalism, and that's how I see my job at FSI, as service journalism. What can I do to make everyone's life easier, better, more informed, or at least pre-warned? Forewarned is forearmed. And so that's what I'm looking forward to in my position here as editor.
Good. And you bring a fresh perspective to it also. And you mentioned something earlier in your previous reporting about finding the extraordinary out of the ordinary. And I think you'll find that with the funeral directors and the people you write about in Funeral Service Insider, that people, just are doing some remarkable things. And I'm sure you'll discover a lot of those stories and have to write about.
Yeah, I've already got a pretty significant list, and I'm just going to keep burning through them. Of course, if you're listening, I'm always accepting pitches. You can please reach out to me on the FSI newsletter or on the Kates Boylston website. My email address is arusso@kbpublishing.com. You can reach me on Twitter. I only have 2 followers as FSI editor, so I would like to have more followers if you don't mind. And of course, you can pitch me there.
I will do that.
Yeah. I can be pitched there, and that's FSI_editor at FSI_editor on Twitter.
Great. So just to mention, Funeral Service Insider is a subscriber newsletter. It comes out every Thursday, I believe, right? In about noontime, it will be, or 11 a.m. It will be in your inbox on your email.
Whether or not it kills me, absolutely.
Okay. And as you said, to subscribe, you can go to katesboylston.com and look for Funeral Service Insider. There's background on it. And Tony's brought a fresh take to it already in the month. I've enjoyed reading it in the past month and editing it, and you're doing an excellent job. And one more real quick question. Tell us about podcasting. You said you did some podcasting. So what was that about?
All right. Well, as I mentioned, I got into journalism late in life. And I've been making at least one podcast a week since 2007. I felt like it was the place that journalism was going to go. I felt like it was a tool I would need in my toolbox. And in 2017, I auditioned for and was awarded the host and writer of a show called This Is War. And in that show, I interviewed combat veterans about their experiences and then turned it into a narrative. If you think of like a long form magazine article where I used to say, I say the boring parts and they say the exciting parts, but it was really well produced. There was music, it wasn't just a straight interview show. It was a story about one person deciding to go to war and what that gave to them and what it took from them and things like that. It was not an easy listen. No one binged that show. It was kind of relentless. And I think that was part of the reason it didn't do as well as the producers had hoped. Because I can be, I don't want to say heavy-handed, but I can be, I'm not going to pull a lot of punches. And I'm not going to spare the reader if I don't think the reader needs to be spared, which is good if, you're writing something that's important. And if you're trying to do a biweekly podcast, it can, like I said, it got a little heavy. So after 3 years, they ended up canceling that. And that's when I got into the cult thing. But I love to do podcasting. I still do one with a friend of mine, the one that we started back in 2007. No one listens to that, and no one should. We usually don't even decide what it's about until about halfway through. But but I've done lots of them. I did one about writing with a publisher friend of mine that ran for about 5 years. And sometimes they're just over. Sometimes there are only so many times you can ask the same questions. How did you decide to write the book? Where did the idea come from? After a while, those questions start to feel tired in your mouth. But they were all good shows. I'm still proud of them all, and looking forward to producing more shows in the future.
Yeah, maybe some about funeral service too.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. All right, Tony, thank you. I look forward to working with you. And again, Funeral Service Insider, the weekly newsletter. And you can go to katesboylston.com and click on Funeral Service Insider to learn about subscribing to it. And, give your Twitter address again. We'll get you more than 2 followers.
Yes, please. It's at FSI_editor. And I check it with pretty regular. I've been stealing story. I mean, that's the journalism thing to do, right? You go on Twitter, you see what stories are around, and then you get inspired to do other stories. I've had several stories I've been inspired to do already, just from lurking about on Twitter and seeing what the industry's talking about. They have a lot of there's funeral service Twitter, which of course there is, but I didn't know it until I went looking for it.
That's right. That's right. All right, Tony, thank you very much. And we'll be seeing you down the road. So thanks for sharing with us today. Take care.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.